Welcome to the latest home match preview of the 25-26 season here on Stones TV and the Maidstone United podcast, where we look ahead to our first midweek match day of the season against both Hampton and Richmond. So to our Tuesday night opponents and their summer transfer activity, starting with a trio of shot stoppers. James Holden joined after leaving Aveley. Luke Ziegler, Croatian, signed in October 2024 and again now for the season ahead. And finally, young keeper Max Spence's signature was confirmed on match day 1. So plenty of depth in between the sticks. Holden's one we saw here for Aveley last season, and he had a very busy game in the Beavers League opener. A worthy occupant of their number 1 berth, Nigel.
He shut the Stones out that night, didn't he? You know, that Aveley winning that game 2-0. And yeah, what better experience, you know, learning your trade under Alan Julian. You know, all those EFL appearances that he's got and that experience that he's got, and you know, he's obviously developing them keepers. You know, I think there was a few hairy moments in that game, you know, but you can see he's got the basics there, and hopefully, you know, working underneath Alan Julian, he can polish those off, and hopefully he'll progress. And as will, you know, the other two that are there as well. You know, he's obviously seen something in them, and they work well together, hopefully, but just not Tuesday evening, please. Yeah, please. So in the back line, young centre-back Harry Thomas signed from Poole Town. Luke Robertson came in from Chertsey Town. Ben Parkinson signed after leaving Kingstonian. Callum O'Keefe stepped up from the academy. Paul Field signed from Moulton and Hersham. Alan Massey signed after 384 appearances at Maidenhead, where he was captain for 9 of his 10 years, a role he will fulfil this season at Beverley. Left back Jude Mason, he had a loan spell with the Beavers back in 2019. He signed after spending last season at Hayes and Yedding. And finally, defenders Nathan Paul Laverley on a 1-month loan from Bromley and Charlie Sayers were both signings confirmed again on match day 1. So Nigel, there's a number of players stepping up from the lower leagues, but one name that sticks out above all the others, the veteran and the skipper, Alan Massey. Great experience to lead a quite young looking side. Yeah, it's quite a young looking defence, isn't it? And I think he's going to need all that experience this year, leading that line of defence, because it's a very young team, isn't it? And not a lot of experience at this level. I mean, a couple of loan spells, but you know, predominantly it is low appearances at the lower level. And whereas you can work with forwards and that, you know, in your defence you're a bit more exposed, and you know, so if you make a mistake, you're going to create chances for the opposition. It's only natural, isn't it? So again, it's a lot of work there for Alan Julian. You know, he's proved himself last year, and they weren't amongst the favourites last year, were they? And they finished quite comfortably in mid-table last year. So hopefully, you know, from their point of view, he can bring that sort of experience that he's got, and with the help of Massey being like he's sort of like the lieutenant on the pitch kind of thing as well. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if they haven't come in contact with each other over their long playing careers. And but you know, looking at it, it's going to be a tough season for Hampton. You know, they're going to hope that defensive unit gels pretty quickly. Otherwise, you know, you can see difficult times.
Let's hope so again for Tuesday. So in the midfield, Ronan Silva signed after leaving Salisbury. He promptly made his debut against his old side on opening day. Harry Gardner signed for 25-26. That's after he played in 7 games at the end of last season, and that included a hat-trick against Welling. Rowan Ince signed from Woking. Stan Flaherty signed from Kingstonian after 16 goals and 12 assists last season. Sam Deadfield returns for a 3rd spell at the Beverley. Eddie Alsop signed from Lewis. Winger Ibrahim Jallo returned to Hampton and Richmond after joining from Billericay during last season. And the day before the season began, Ollie Turner signed after leaving Aldershot in the summer. So Nigel, quite some experienced heads in that midfield, as well as some familiar faces for Beavers fans.
Yeah, again, you know, you've got the likes of Ryan Ince in there, who's got that experience, that National League experience of the last few seasons playing for Woking. And then you've got the lad from Lafferty coming in from Kingstonian who bagged the goals, but it's the question marks are still there whether we can transcend that up to the next level and still perform. And just from a name that stuck out for me there as a Swampy, Eddie Allsop, which played for Sheppey a few years ago. So he's come up through the league, and these players deserve their chance. And there's, as I say, there's question marks on all of these players, but Alan Julian has proved himself to be an astute sort of operator at this level. He seems to have stepped into management quite comfortably, which isn't normally the case for goalkeepers. I mean, I know Andy Woodman's the exception recently at Bromley, but you don't normally see goalkeepers make that step into being a manager, do you? But he I think he's made that step quite comfortably. And looking at some of his post-match interviews, he says it how it is. He's not one that's going to come out and lambast the team. He's very much sort of like an arm around these players and encouraging them and trying to get the best out of them. And I think he's going to have to use all that experience this season. But good luck to these players. I hope they sort of do thrive and they can use it as a stepping stone or take their game to the next level.
Indeed. So up front, Swiss striker Davide Radari signed from Hastings United after 61 goals in his last 2 seasons. Craig Fassenmaid signed after also swapping out from Salisbury in the summer. Reece Greco-Cox signed after departing Woking as a free agent, before Danai Hassan's signing was another of those confirmed on match day 1. Nigel, some great potential in these forwards, as well as some who have mates from last season here in the midfield. So everyone likes a 2-for-1 deal, and Alan Julian has got 2 pair, feeling flush, no doubt, with a pair of former cards in Ince and Greco-Cox. I thank you.
Yeah, I mean, he's the one that stands out. Placimu is a striker that's comfortable at this level. I think he's been at Salisbury. I think he's been at Hemel Hempstead as well in the past. So he certainly knows his way around the league. And Greco-Cox, I mean, in our last National League season, I remember he came in from Crawley and kind of hit the ground running. He's got a lot of goals in a short space of time, but then he got quite a serious injury, and it would seem that he hasn't really recovered and didn't really get his place back in the Woking team. And obviously Neil Ardley's come in there towards the back end of that season and decided to move him on. So from his point of view, he's going to be hoping that he can sort of learn from that experience and kick his career on again. Because he's still quite relatively young. He's not a veteran by any means. So there's certainly players there that know where the goal is. So it's certainly stuff to work on, and you can sort of see that the players they've got in, they are working to a plan, and they're not going to be pushovers by any means. But it's just, you look around the league and how other teams have strengthened and how other teams have kicked on. We've mentioned before in our other previews, a fellow mid-table team in Chelmsford, and look at the different directions they're going in. Chelmsford and Hampton and Richmond didn't finish that far apart in the league last year, but this year potentially they could be poles apart. So it's just the way that the football is going at this level now. You've got the haves and the have-not. Alan Julian knows what he's got to work with. He knows the budget that he's got, the constraints that he's got within his budget, and he's looking to get those diamonds and those sort of ex-pros or those experienced players to come in and work and gel as a team. And I'm sure at this point in the season anything's possible, isn't it? So you start off with the good intentions and just see where it takes you. But that's where they're at, and they're just going to be one of these teams that are going to be looking to bloody the noses of the so-called big teams and keep clear of that relegation zone. So again, not to repeat a phrase that we've already used, but hopefully that happens after Tuesday.
There it is. So in terms of form, the Beavers spent about 2/3 of last season in the bottom half of National League South and only confirmed their safety with a couple of weeks to go in the end. Their pre-season fixtures this time around, they included a home game against Sutton United. They got 1 win, 4 draws and 2 defeats, scoring 7 and conceding 11 in those friendlies. They opened at home to Salisbury with a goalless draw before a trip to Dorking before we recorded this episode. So Nigel, how do you rate their chances this season? Another one of these sides that do like to yo-yo within the division because they've been here quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, a few seasons ago they were quite strong, weren't they? But like we've said, the quality at the top end of that league and the budgets that the teams have got, especially with the three southern teams coming down from the National League, you know, in Ebbsfleet, Dagenham and Redbridge and Maidenhead, yeah, they're going to be strong, aren't they? And that you'd expect those teams to be up there. And their main aim this year, they're in that group of teams that haven't spent money. No disrespect, you haven't got to spend money, but they know the constraints of their budget. Yeah. So, you know, finishing just outside of that drop zone, that bottom four, would probably be a good season. You know, that's not taking anything away from them, but yeah, you know, just staying in this league would be good for them. You know, and maybe, you know, just survive and just have a good season. You know, maybe pick up a few results. They've certainly got the players that can do that. You know, you can see them picking up a result against one of the so-called bigger teams, and you know, just giving their fans that sort of memories, and then just resetting it and maybe looking to go again next season, because you know, again, you don't know how the setup's going to be. You know, it could be that 3 northern teams come down next year and only 1 southern team, and you know, it might not be as strong. So you know, they're just sort of, you can't attack a division if you're not in a division. So you know, from their point of view, they're pretty consistent in that sort of level. I think they're probably up there with Chelmsford as sort of one of the sort of longest
top
serving.
3 or 4 from memory.
Yeah, you know, in the last 10 years that have been in this league. I mean, I think they did have a couple of seasons in the East Midlands Premier, but yeah, they're always, you know, they're always associated as a step 6 team, aren't they? Level 6 team. So yeah, you know, that would be their aim, to remain that at the end of the season, I think.
Yeah. So the previous matches in the head-to-head, 8 of the last 14 encounters have ended in a home win. 5 of those 8 to the Stones' advantage. The dramatic late win in the FA Cup last season after a dire, let's not beat about the bush, 0-0 midweek evening match. Finishing with that 3-0 win late on last season at the Beverley. So Nigel, any evidence from the start of this season to suggest possibly another one-sided game on Tuesday either way?
No, I don't think you can make any predictions like that early season, because anything's possible, isn't it? You know, teams are up there. They haven't got that bad run of form behind them, and ultimately, you know, it's that 3rd game into the season, isn't it? So you know, whether you've won those first 2 games or you haven't, you know, you can't say it's in any way sort of momentum building, can you? Yeah. So I think it is literally just, you know, take care of your own sort of issues, get your own sort of pairings and partnerships and patterns of play working, and just see where it takes you. So yeah, it'd probably just be another early season game, and very probably bitty, and you know, because both teams sort of like to play that sort of way, don't they? You know, they haven't got the expansive game to sort of open teams up, so it's going to be sort of like like an attritional game, I would say, and hopefully, from Stone's perspective, we can come out on top this time, but I don't expect it to be anything other than sort of a very close game, probably 1 goal either way, really.
Another 0-0 like last season. Great. If you are coming to the game on Tuesday, do remember the A229 Royal Engineers roundabout roadworks. The roundabout outside the Gallagher Stadium is closed overnight from the 18th to the 21st of August. The work, which will take about 4 nights to complete, starts on that Monday night. Closures are between 10 at night and 5 in the morning. So with the Stones playing Hampton and Richmond on Tuesday the 19th, the start time of the works on that night will be moved to 11 rather than 10. So that'll allow vehicles parked on James Watman Way and in the stadium car park to get out of the place safely. Work subject to the weather, and it could be postponed if we get some bad weather, so do please leave the ground punctually on Tuesday, and do also remember, if you can't make it to the game and all that shenanigan of the roundabout is putting you off, then do tune in to Stones Live. Of course, we'll be there. Chris and Darren, 7:30 on Stones Live. See them on the hot take, hear them on the highlights once they go online. It will be mostly under the lights on Tuesday. Those midweek evening games do hit different. Here's hoping we avoid a repeat of last season's board draw at the same point in the campaign. Our thanks to you all out there, as ever, for watching or listening to the latest preview. Like and subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for the Maidstone United podcast. See or hear you for our next preview ahead of the next league away game of the season. It's a trip to newly promoted AFC Tottenham. And as always,
Come on, you Stones!